People think money builds your life, but the truth is, your energy does. One wrong investment can drain your soul, and one wise choice can rewrite your entire destiny. Your energy is your currency. Spend it wisely. Napoleon Hill. I learned this truth not from a book, not from a lecture hall, not even from the legacy of Napoleon Hill, but from the raw battlefield of life itself, where every choice is a silent investment, every emotion a withdrawal, and every dream a debt that must someday be paid. And so my story begins in the dimly lit room of my youth, where I sat hunched over a cracked wooden desk, trying to make sense of why some people rise effortlessly while others sink despite working twice as hard. And back then, I believed success depended only on resources, money, education, connections. But life would soon show me that the real resource, the only true universal currency, is energy, the invisible fuel that governs our focus, our courage, our discipline, our capacity to believe in possibilities when the world seems determined to prove otherwise. And as a young man, I squandered this currency carelessly, like many do, spending it on arguments that didn't matter, friendships that drained more than they gave, habits that promised comfort but returned emptiness, and dreams that weren't even mine, borrowed from the expectations of society, from the fears of my parents, from the illusions of peers who pretended to be further ahead than they really were. And for years, I lived in this exhausting cycle, waking up tired, sleeping restless, feeling like my life was a cup with a hole carved deliberately at the bottom, and nothing I poured into it ever stayed. Until one day I encountered a line from Napoleon Hill, not even a full chapter, not a full page, just a single sentence from Think and Grow Rich that read, "Your only limit is the one you set in your own mind." And although I had heard this idea before, that day something clicked. Maybe because I had finally hit my breaking point. Maybe because the weight of my own stagnation had become too heavy to ignore. And suddenly, I understood that limits were not walls built by fate, but fences built by thought, maintained by energy. And then I began to notice something. The people I admired weren't necessarily more talented, intelligent, or privileged. They were simply better investors of their emotional, mental, and spiritual energy. They chose where to put their attention with the precision of surgeons, while I had been spending mine like a gambler, tossing coins into every slot machine of distraction, hoping something would hit. And as this realization sank deeper, I decided to conduct an experiment, not with money or opportunity, but with my own energy. And the first step was brutally simple. I stopped giving energy to anything that made me feel smaller, weaker, or drained. So I cut off gossip, late-night scrolling, pointless debates, and the toxic companionship of people who thrived on chaos. And though this cleansing felt lonely at first, it also felt like opening windows in a house that had been suffocating under trapped air for years. And in that silence, I rediscovered a forgotten truth. Energy, once freed from waste, naturally flows toward growth. So I began reading again, not lazily but with intention. I began speaking again, not impulsively, but consciously. I began dreaming again, not as fantasies, but as plans with deadlines. And the more I aligned my energy, the more my life shifted, as if unseen doors were opening, opportunities appearing, mentors emerging. And for the first time, I understood the power Hill described when he wrote about definiteness of purpose. For purpose is not just a goal. It is a magnetic field that organizes your energy, making your actions coherent, your decisions sharp, your path clear. And as I progressed on this journey, I started noticing how people behave with their internal currency, how some invest in gratitude and resilience, and therefore grow richer in spirit, while others pour everything into resentment and self-doubt, and remain broke no matter how much external wealth they accumulate. And one particular encounter solidified this understanding. I met an elderly man at a bus station, dressed in a worn blue coat, but carrying a calmness so solid it felt like shelter. And he noticed my frustration on my face and told me, "Young man, people think time is the rarest thing, but it's not. Energy is rarer. Because you can have time and still waste it. But if you have energy, you can create time, value, opportunity, everything." And those words lived inside me like a seed, eventually blooming into a truth I could not ignore. And so I began treating each morning like a financial investor reads stock charts, checking where my energy was going, checking the emotional expenses I didn't realize I was paying. Asking myself, why give energy to fear when courage yields better returns? Why give energy to opinions when results speak louder? Why give energy to memories that hurt when the future waits like an unclaimed inheritance? And with each honest question, I refined my life further, cutting away noise, sharpening my focus, realizing that energy is not just a currency, it is identity, destiny, and freedom. And the more intentionally I spent it, the more power I gained over my life, until one very specific moment changed everything. I stood in front of the mirror one morning and whispered, I am no longer spending energy to keep myself small. And that declaration was like an ignition switch, because that day I applied for a job I once feared, pitched a project I once doubted, ended a relationship I once tolerated, and chased a dream I once postponed. And as days turned into months, my energy transformed into confidence, my confidence into competence, my competence into success. And this success into a reminder that I had become the architect of my own mind, and therefore the architect of my destiny, exactly as Napoleon Hill promised. And with each victory, I understood a deeper layer of the truth. Energy is not just what you feel, but what you feed. Feed anger, and you become anger. Feed fear, and you become fear. Feed a vision, and you become the vision. And so now everywhere I go, every person I meet, I see them carrying invisible wallets of energy, some overflowing, some empty, some guarded, some leaking through emotional wounds they never learned to heal. And I want to tell them what I learned. You are not exhausted because your life is hard. You are exhausted because you keep paying energy to things that do not grow you, things that do not deserve the currency of your soul. And you keep lending your power to fears that charge interest, to people who give nothing in return, to regrets that act like recurring subscriptions, draining your mental bank, slowly, silently, relentlessly. And today, as I reflect on this long journey, from the lost boy at the desk to the aware man who writes these words, I know this truth for certain. You become wealthy, not when you collect things, but when you protect your energy. You become powerful, not when you dominate others, but when you control where your mind goes. And you become free, not when the world changes, but when your internal economy becomes stable, disciplined, intentional. And so I live now with a new philosophy, a new clarity, a new spiritual arithmetic in which every thought is an investment, every word a transaction, every emotion a deposit, and every day a marketplace where I choose to spend wisely, deliberately, consciously. Because energy is not infinite, not replaceable, not refundable. And among all the riches one may gain in life, the richest are those who understand the simple, timeless, liberating truth. Your energy is your currency. Spend it wisely. For the world is always buying your attention. Distractions are always bidding for your focus, and fear is always collecting its tax. But you always have the power to decide where the flow goes. And whoever controls their energy controls their reality, their future, their fate. And that is the real secret many search for. Success is not earned in hours, but in energy. Not measured in years, but in awareness. And once you master this internal economy, nothing outside you can ever make you poor again.